You know, we've been doing a lot of work this week with subpersonalities.
Yeah.
And disowning parts of or owning parts of ourselves that we've disowned.
Yeah.
And when I've read about the fulcrums of development, as you move up, like 7, 8, 9, I'm really unclear about the subpersonalities that come out in those levels.
Okay, be glad to.
And I know you've mentioned like the Darth Vader move.
Yeah.
And that seems real drastic.
Yeah.
So I'm kind of wondering about some of the more subtle ones.
Got it.
That we might come into contact with.
Sure. Let me give a couple. In the interesting range, I'll use spiral dynamics, roughly similar, for the values. And we'll talk about moving from, let's say, orange to green to yellow to turquoise to coral, which would be the beginning of transpersonal. I just give you a few very quickly. So you all understand the question? Subpersonality split off. When people move from orange into green, and you'll see immediately how this goes on. Any subpersonality, you can have a subpersonality split off at literally any level of development. And when that happens, in the normal line of development, and this is a very important discovery that we stumbled on, because if you go back to the great traditions, they really don't understand the distinction between just doing awareness on an object that you should transcend versus awareness on an object that you're just associating because you don't want to touch it. And they have no real way of distinguishing that. As your self grows, and it goes from, what's I at one stage becomes me of the I of the next stage. The subject of one stage becomes the object of the subject of the next stage. So again, I use spiral dynamics, even though, just remember, that's just one line. It's not some of these others, but we're just going to do that as a summary. So very quickly, let's just pick it up at red. And you're identified with red, so you can't see it. You are it. So you're using red to look at the world. You can't look at it. The subject is red. What you are aware of are your purple thoughts and any beige thoughts beige would be hunger, that kind of stuff. But remember, there's a time you're identified with beige, and you couldn't see it. You were hunger. You didn't see hunger as an object. So now you're at red, and you're seeing purple, and you're seeing beige, but you can't see red. So an obvious subpersonality is if you start to move up to blue, and blue, mythic membership, conformist, and these other levels, tends to be very harsh and very punitive. So what can happen, possibly because of parents, possibly because of society, possibly because of your own self-contraction, that as you move up to blue, and it has a lot of judgments about red, then you can split off a red subpersonality. And now you split it off while it is still an I. So it actually becomes a little I. Now that's the key. So that split off subpersonality now actually is an I, but that's not how you perceive it, because repression means you see it as an other. So let's say if there's a red impulse, I'm angry, and I dissociate that and split it off and project it, then all of a sudden I'm not angry, but you are. You seem awfully angry all the time. I wonder what your problem is. And more than that, you seem angry at me all the time. Because the anger is always connected to the projector. So no matter where you throw it, it's aimed at you. So if you're in a very puritanical environment, and you have some good old red lust come up, and you split that off, then all of a sudden, look, I don't have any sexual impulses, but an awful lot of people are interested in me sexually. So now this really happens. You've seen the studies on this about homophobia. Yeah, the tests show that the bless their hearts, but the fundamentalists running around, trying to stop gay rights and making a big issue out of it. If you actually give them tests that we don't really need to go into, they get turned on by homosexual pictures more than straight men do. So that's a classic example. They're projecting it. Everybody out there wants to have homosexual sex with me. It's like, whoa, kill that person fast. Go to Wyoming and you can. So I know, okay, I know. I meant Kansas. So that's a classic case of turning it into a second or third person. Now here's the point. If you have split off that I, if you're doing it normally, you would just transcend, you're healthy, you're still one with it, and you transcend it, then it would become my impulse. It's still an I, me, or mine, so it belongs in my orbit. That's healthy. You're supposed to transcend it that way. You're supposed to go, I have thoughts, I am not those thoughts, and then you can transcend. That's how the subject becomes the object of the next subject. That's all in the first person line. But when I split off a first person and throw it out there, now it's a second or third person. Now it's, oh, you have the impulse. Or I can turn it even, I go so far as to turn it into a third person it. Now all of a sudden it's a compulsion that just shows up. I don't know why I have this anxiety. I don't know why I have this phobia. I don't know why I have this compulsion. It's stronger than I am. Now it's a third person. Your own I has become an it. So if you have that second or third person object and you start doing vipassana on it, I am aware of that as an object, I am aware of that. You dissociate it more and more and more. It doesn't help because there's a repression barrier stopping you from making that an I and a me and a mine. Do shikantazen on it all you want, it'll get worse. And so this is one of the problems this is why we so much want to integrate Eastern and Western, because of exactly these kinds of things that can tend to happen. So by 3, 2, 1, take the third person it, face it, talk to it, be it. That's the simple process that we're working with in converting what can be a third or second person into a first person and re-owning it. Now, as soon as you re-own it, it's a red. Now, let's say you're at, for the sake of argument, we're saying you're green, and that red has been split off. As soon as you re-own it, that I, you've now, see, it's an I again. And that little parcel of I consciousness almost immediately will go right on up to where you are. So now you used to have like $20 invested that was taken out of your bank account and put out there as a projection. And that means now, let's say if you were given $100 at birth, now you've only got $80 left in your bank account. So, okay, well, I can do that. But you get to the next stage, you split off another, $20. Now there's $40, and you're down to 60. It's looking slim. And every time you go home to Christmas, all these subpersonalities jump up and eat you. So you go completely insane the moment you walk in the door. You can't figure out why. So we get up to orange or green or higher subpersonalities. Now, what happens, I just want to sort of give the idea that any of these can be split off. Here's the most common pathology in cultural creatives, which is that they're at green. And what happens is, we're talking about pathology now. We're talking about higher subpersonalities. Now I'll take it on into turquoise and show you what's involved. But green often splits off an orange subpersonality and projects it onto corporate capitalism. And now there's not a communist under every bed. There's an Enron executive under every bed. And I hate every corporate capitalist out there. They're here. There. Now, corporate capitalism might be a bad thing, but if you put your shadow projection on top of it as well, then you've got a double evil, where one really is enough. And more than that, you're going to go around like the gay crusader, It's just, and it's going to drive you insane, because if you're going to try to both cure evils in the world, I'm using evils in a non-blue sense, or be really bad things out there, then it's most important for you to have as much equanimity and capacity to judge realistically what's happening. And the easiest way to mess that up is to flip a projection out on it, because you just can't get a good handle on it when that's happening. So one of the 3, 2, 1 processes of somebody at green who's doing that is they have to befriend, like the captain of the Valdez or something. And it's like, no, that's the monster. It can't be me. It doesn't mean that what happened wasn't bad, but we don't need two bads. And so that's a very common one. So there are two kinds of pathologies that can occur at each level generally. One is you can take something from the level itself or the one previous and you can just repress it or split it off. The other is that as a higher level tries to come down, you can fight that. And the defenses that you formed against lower stuff that you're pushing out of your awareness, the same defenses you have against the devil will prevent God. In other words, if you have a rigid self-contracted self, because you're fighting so much down here, it makes it also very hard for higher stuff to come down, both higher stages and higher states. So that's one of the reasons that we like to work when we just recommend modules for ITP, and we're the only ones that do this, but I think it's absolutely crucial, just if you want to do a handful of modules, do cognitive, which means have an interpretive framework that's adequate to turquoise or coral or so on. And for us, aqua is the most adequate one we know. If we find a better one, we'll let you know. But cognitive study is very important. And again, remember GNI, gnosis. So have a cognitive component, have a meditative component of some sort, or spiritual component, whatever you're comfortable with. Physical, seriously, just something as simple as, and I'm not kidding you, lift weights for 6 months and it will change your life, I guarantee it. Now you don't have to get crazy about it. I think Sean lifts a little bit too much, don't you think? There's a rule at the gym, which is when your neck gets bigger than your head, take a day off. You know what I mean? Okay. Play a little Parcheesi. So, but those 4 modules will just by themselves, and it doesn't take more than really some total, maybe an hour a week. Really profound change. We really do want to work on that. Now, very briefly, I'll give you the can higher. So when you start getting up, even into, let's say, turquoise. Now, turquoise tends to make statements like yellow, incidentally, if you all sometimes have trouble between yellow and turquoise. Yellow is almost entirely secular. Most of the things that yellow says don't have any reference to a spiritual component or anything like that. Occasionally, but it's rare. So it's mostly like the universe is an interrelated series of systems and so on. And so it's a very sort of systems theory kind of approach. And emphasize the individuality in the midst of that. Turquoise starts to say things like, the earth is one organism with a single mind. You know, those kinds of things start to sound spiritual. But they don't necessarily have direct experience of that. And a direct experience, a really overpoweringly direct experience of that one mind can be threatening. Now, it's not threatening always, and certainly not threatening when you have the really incredibly skillful introduction that Diane and Genpo and so on do with Big Mind. That's a very gentle way to get into that. But if these things happen quickly, if they happen abruptly, they notoriously rattle the daylights out of people. So if you're at turquoise, what can you do? Well, a lot of second-tier people have green subpersonalities. And so they get hyper allergic to green. And they write books like Boomeritis, which incidentally cure them entirely of their disease, as you can imagine. So that one example of turquoise is just that. No, I don't care how high you are. You can split off stuff below you. That's the strange thing. Because as long as there's a little bit of the self, which means self-contraction, then there is a zone, a threat zone. And there's something outside that can threaten it. And so there's a self-contraction around infinity, around your heart. And so that threat zone is the repression barrier. And it can, like say, repress things lower than it, or it can repress things starting to come down. And so turquoise can repress God. So does that give a little bit of a sense of some of those? Yeah. And what most of us here have at least some interface, cognitive or otherwise, between turquoise or coral, or that kind of riding that edge between second and third tier, which is why one of the presentations that some of the teachers here do, Jeff, for example, it is talk about first tier, second tier, third tier is just a generalization to give you a sense of how to feel into these. And cognitively, the more they make sense, then emotionally, the less threatening they are.